Welcome to our Parsha Shiur on Nechama Leibovich. So I thought that just a Gilyon would be a nice change of pace. I thought it was a good one. Um, Let me share my screen here. And with many thanks to Rabbi Bieler for his helpful cheat sheet. This one is on the topic of the relationship of Yosef and his brothers and I don't know if you lose the hyperlink
Yael,
yes.
could you please make the print
Oh,
larger?
yes. Thank you for reminding me. Um,
Sure.
I was just going to
That's
say that if
very
anyone
good.
wanted, oh, good. Okay. Yeah, I know I need to get rid of this thing and center us back on the page. If anyone wants to see the Gillion, I don't know if the links get lost when Karen sends them out so helpfully, but so that is, I just put it in the chat just in case anyone wants to see it. And I think that this question is really an echo of last week's question. It's just that the other end of the relationship behaving poorly, right? So last week we thought about what role the brothers played in the sale of Yosef, right? How could the brothers choose to sell Yosef? Did they choose to sell Yosef? Did really the Midianites sell Yosef? And I think that we talked about how the question that drove the Mefarshim about the brothers was like, it's bad enough that they put him in the pit. Could they really have chosen to sell him and then not go back for him? They must have really believed that he had died or been taken from the pit by like an animal. And so I think the question this week is how could Yosef put his brothers, and not just his brothers, because by extension his father, through this extended trauma? Like you would think when the brothers show up in Yosef's court that he would immediately say, oh my gosh, long lost brothers. Even if he was mad at them, he would at least reveal himself to them. And if he doesn't do that, the question is, right, why? Why doesn't he do that? And so I think that that's a question that um, the Mefarshim are grappling with, and Nechama Leibovich sort of crafted this collection to think about the range of how Yosef might have chosen to behave to his brothers. Did I see a question, Nelson? Do you want to say
No,
something?
no,
Oh,
no,
okay,
no,
sorry.
no. Changing
Um,
something.
oh, okay. So these are the three psukim in question here. Right, Vayar Yosef et achav vayakrireim. Right, Yosef sees the brothers and Yosef recognizes them, which makes sense. They're older, but they probably look sort of roughly similar. V'yitnaker aleihem, but he acted like a stranger to them. V'yidaber itam kashot, and he dealt with them very harshly. He spoke harshly to them. V'yomer aleihen, ve'ayin batem, right? And he asks them where they came from. So clearly playing the part of a stranger. V'yomer me'eretz Canaan lishbor ochel. And they say, well, we came to get food, to procure food because there is no food in Canaan. Vayaker Yosef et achav vehem lo hikiruhu. Right, and Pesach Chet seems almost like extra, right? Because Yosef recognized the brothers, but they did not recognize him, which again makes sense because Yosef is now dressed as an Egyptian vizier, and even if the brothers knew that they had sold Yosef into slavery and he hadn't died, there's probably no world in which they imagined that he would be the guy in charge when they get to Egypt. So he's out of context and he looks different and he goes by a different name and he speaks in Egyptian. But Yosef recognized them. Yeah, Tamar.
When that line where it says that Yosef, Vayal Yosef et Echav, Vayakirem, Vayitnaker, okay, Vaydaber itam kashot, Vaydaber itam kashot. He spoke harshly to them. That immediately brought my mind back to where we read that the brothers couldn't say a good word to him. Lo yachlu ledabro shalom or something like that. So he is meting out the same treatment that he received. They couldn't speak a good word to him, and now he speaks to them harshly. So that was interesting. It was in both cases, it's how you speak or you don't speak.
Yeah. Yes. Yes, I think there's certainly almost like you see the midah keneged midah come out here, right? Because they spoke in a sort of kasher way or in a ra way. he speaks to them in a kasha way. Of course, it cycles back even further, right? Because Yosef tells Yaakov all the dibatam ra'ot, all of their bad words, which is what gets them to not like him in the first place, right? Yosef reports back the bad words of the brothers to Yaakov. Then the brothers have no good words for Yosef, and now Yosef has no good words for them. It's true. It's a maybe even like a vicious cycle more than midah keneged midah. But I agree. Certainly, it evokes like a memory of how the brothers acted to Yosef. I don't think that it's so much that Yosef treats them poorly, it's that he doesn't tell them who he is. That's the piece that I think confounds the right. This is a long parsha that could have been easily avoided, right? We could have right away, Yosef could have said, "It's me. I'd like to see my father and Binyamin," and he could have, had them come, and that would have been the end. But he does this whole long thing instead, right? Sort of stringing the brothers along. Um, Pasuk Tet, right? V'yizkor Yosef et hachalamot asher chalam lahem. This is going to be a major component of the commentary, right? Is that now it seems like Yosef remembers the dreams that he had dreamed. Vayomer alehem meraglim atem lirot et ervat haaretz batem. Recalling his dreams, Yosef says that you must be spies. You must have come to see the land in its nakedness, the erva of the land. And so something about the dreams continues to make Yosef go on the offensive, right? To not just speak harshly, but also to accuse them of spying. So the Ramban, which I want us to look at closely, tries to give two different reasons for which Yosef would wait to tell the brothers who he is. So the first, and let's skip that first little bit here, just to lefi da'ati, right? That we're interested in what the Ramban's opinion is. So according to the Ramban, lefi da'ati shahadavar behefech, right? And it's not like Rashi said, ki omar hakatuv, kir birot Yosef etachav mishtachavim lo. Zachar kol hachalamot asher chalam lahem. Right, something about Yosef seeing his brothers bow down to him made him think like, aha, the dream is starting to become fulfilled. But v'yada shelo nitkayem echad mehem b'pam hazot, right? But he knew that in this instance, not one of the dreams had been fulfilled right yet, I would say. Right, the first dream was that kol echad yishtachavu lo, batchila min hachalom harishon, right? That in the first dream, all the brothers would bow down because there were all of the sheaves of wheat, and the wheat refers to the 11 brothers. The second time, right, in accordance with the second dream about the moon, the sun, and the 11 stars bowing down, would be about all the brothers, but of course also about his parents. Kevan שלא ראה בנימין עמהם, חשב זאת התחבולה שיעליל עליהם, כדי שיביאו גם בנימין אחיו אליו. So when he didn't see Binyamin, he thought, well, the dream has not really come true, right? The bowing made him think of the dream. But because Binyamin wasn't there, it was only 10 stars or 10 sheaves, right? And so it seems that it's for some reason, right? Instead of I don't find this a fulfilling answer, because why didn't he just say, as the vizier of Egypt, I command you to bring my brother? But he plays this whole game instead, right? But what the Ramban is going to say is, Yosef didn't want to come out with the knowledge that he was Yosef. He didn't say, go send my father, send the wagons, the way he did in the second case. Because Yaakov would have come right away. And it seems as though Yosef, in what I would sort of characterize as like an OCD behavior, needs to have the first dream fulfilled without Yaakov there, and then the second dream fulfilled after that. And that it without that, he like couldn't fulfill the second dream. And so it seems like the reason the dreams are mentioned in Pasuk Tet, according to the Ramban, is that this is the reason that Yosef behaved the way he did, because he needed the dreams to come to reality in a certain order. And he didn't think he could get that order by just coming out with who he was. And the Ramban expresses this sort of difficulty, right? V'lu haya Yosef choteh chet gadol letzaer et aviv v'lahamido yamim rabim bishkol ve'evel al Shimon ve'alav. Right? He says, because were it not for this consideration about this dream pattern, Yosef would have been regarded as having committed a great sin. He brought anguish to his father. He left him for many more days as an Avel, both for Shimon, who he holds back with him, and for himself. Right? It seems very harsh to his father, who has to endure many more months, right, of going up and down to Egypt, and all of this is not going to happen in one 20-minute Parsha reading. But it must have been that way. Right? Maybe he wanted to cause his brothers anguish, as Tamar said. He is echoing the behavior he got from them. But he couldn't possibly have not had compassion for his father. But he had to do this in this way so that the dreams would come up in the correct way. So that is answer number one. I don't know how it sits with you guys. I will admit I do not care for it. I feel like it's such a Yosef could have done it that way. He could have said, "It's me, Yosef. Go tell Abba, bring him to Egypt with Binyamin." He could have said, when you get here, could Abba wait outside for a minute? He could have caused him a minute of anguish. He could have had the brothers bow down to him. And then he could have called his father in, right? There are so many other ways to achieve the dreams in order with truth. But yet the Ramban seems to feel like that's a reasonable reason to have done this.
Well, I think there is some. Can you hear?
Yeah.
Why didn't Joseph, during all the years that preceded the visit of the brothers, he had the power to send somebody, a messenger to his father, and say, "Your Joseph is alive and is powerful. Come and see him." Or he is. And I think there's something a little mischievous about Joseph, and in the fact that the dream itself, that the sun and the moon, his parents, would bow to him. He had this grandiose need that he needed to be bigger than his parents. So now he had the chance to say, okay, now I'm getting even with them. I'm going to make them pay for whatever, for throwing me the pit.
This looks to me like an example of a tendency not to admit any wrongdoing by our avot. That's a very strong tendency. Often we'll read midrashim and so on, explaining behavior away, bad behavior away.
Yeah,
and
I agree with
that's
that.
what this looks like.
Yeah, I too agree. Like I find it difficult, and I wish that he would. I wish the Rambam would just say, even if this was why he did it, it's like not cool, right? He could have found another way. I agree with both of you. I like the word of grandiose. I think that's like a good way of explaining it, right? Of thinking about it. He had to do it in the way that like made him feel the smartest and the best. And like it doesn't feel good. And yes, I would rather be honest, right? Yosef should have either told, his father and brothers much earlier before the famine even came, or at the very least, once Hashem sort of delivers them to his doorstep, it feels very difficult that he didn't do something more, I don't know the right word, more forthwith, more honest. So. Oh, Judith, please.
Wanted to mention that my husband, Ted, of blessed memory, had a very interesting take on the matter of why Joseph might have been reluctant to contact or hesitant about contacting his family. In his view, there are little clues throughout that Joseph may have thought that his father might have been complicit in this plot to do away with him, or because his father had been noticeably upset about the dreams, etc. Why did he send him on that mission that wound up with him being thrown in a pit, etc.? And to then later when Joseph has two sons and the way he names them and so on, there's an indication that he's kind of trying to forget all the past and
Right.
severed ties and so on. So this is a very touchy matter for him. Why he has to do it in stages, that's another story. I'm not going to
Mhm.
defend that, but
Okay, I
I,
hear what you're saying. Yeah,
well,
right. Like,
I must say that Drash, Shira repeated it at the Shiva for my husband, and
mm,
a young man who was an Ethiopian adoptee heard that and was profoundly moved by it because he
mm,
had no idea why his African parents had given him up, and he felt that
mm,
this really was a kind of resolution for him.
mm.
They didn't do it willingly.
Yeah, okay. I think that's a fair point, right? Judith, I think, is saying, right, even if Yosef is behaving poorly, he might have very good reason. He had suffered enormous trauma. But the Ramban doesn't say that. I wish, right? I think, Judith, if he had said that first, but so dreams are sort of one way of approaching why he did this. The other way that the Ramban brings is about a worry about Binyamin, which I think is a slightly nicer spin, right? He says,
Mhm.
"Ha'inyan hasheni she'asa lahem begavia lo shetiyeh kavanato letza'aram." He wasn't trying to cause them anguish, right? Again, that seems to be the Ramban's goal, is to prove that that's not what Yosef is doing, as Tamar said, to whitewash, right, the sins of Yosef, if we feel that way about them. So he is worried that the brothers transferred their hate of Yosef onto Binyamin, which is a reasonable worry because um, he knows, right, that Binyamin is the other child of the favored wife. He probably is, as someone here said, right, sort of refuses to admit his own part in this. And so perhaps just thinks it's only because he was Rachel's son that the brothers hated him, as opposed to because he reported on them, or he had these lofty dreams about them. And so he was worried about Binyamin. And so Yosef didn't want Binyamin to travel with them until he had tested out his love for him, their love for him, because he was worried about him being harmed. He wanted to be cautious, right? That, again, it's not my favorite, but it rings a little bit more true to me. This idea that Yosef was worried about just saying, bring Binyamin here. And so he wanted to conduct his own test. You know, I'm not sure again, I think there are other ways he could have done it, but I think that it's not a totally unreasonable worry. Okay, I want us to move on to the Radak, because the Radak um, has a contrary view, right? And one of the things I love about these Gilionot is how Nechama is able to compare and contrast, right? And to say, like, the Ramban has some interesting ideas, but here's another perspective, right? And the Radak says, "Asher chalam lahem, ki lahem hayu chalamot v'ra'a ata pitronam," right? He realized that the dream's reality, right, had come true. Uhu ba'avuram. He realized now that they had hated him on account of these dreams. Uvizachru kol ma she'asa lo gamalam ra'a aval tziaram v'haknitam. Right, so he says this is why he remembered all that they had done. Instead of repaying them in kind, he only made them extremely uncomfortable for a while. Which again is not a perfect change, but it does seem as though the Radak is saying he really just wanted to mess with them, right? He remembered how mean they were to him, and he wanted them to feel a little bit of that. There's this interesting editor's note. I have no idea who this editor is, but it comes from Safaria. Perhaps what the author means is that originally Yosef had thought the brothers resented him becoming a big shot in his dreams, whereas only now did he realize that what they really resented was the fact that they, the brothers, appeared as socially low-ranking, slave-like in Yosef's dreams. I'm not sure how they get that from the Radak, but I think the idea that whether or not they hated Yosef being lofty or them being small, Yosef remembers that hate. The dream and the feelings come back all at once, right? And he definitely wants to cause them some grief. So at least this is real in my mind, right? It's not comfortable. I wish that Yosef hadn't done it, but I understand it, at least to a degree. And if we look at, sorry, we're just going to skip ahead down to the questions here, right? So, okay, so we talked about number 2. To answer number 1, I think we have to look at everything. Question number 3, many people disagree with the Radak based on our psukim, 42:7-9. How? Right? So the Radak says, right, he wanted to be mean to them because after he dreamed the dream. So let's go back up to our psukim. Is there anything about the chronology of the psukim that you think sort of goes against the Radak's idea that once he remembered the dream, he decided to be mean to them? It comes from Tamar's very first observation.
Oh. He spoke harshly to them.
Bingo, right? It seems like some of the commentaries, and Nechama Leibovich doesn't bring them here, but she's alluding to them, right? Say, well, wait a second, Radak. The dreams are not mentioned till Pasuk Tet, but in Pasuk Zayin, it says already, V'yadaber itam kashot, right? And so maybe your read is not exactly correct, right? Maybe it wasn't about remembering the dreams, but there was some other thing that upset you before that. And then, right, to say that maybe this is not just about making them uncomfortable, but is about, it's all about forcing the dreams to be fulfilled, right? And so Yosef was going to be mean to them either way, and then he's also going to be sort of weird and petty about them. So I thought that was interesting. Then Nechama Leibovich brings us to very interesting people. It was very hard for me to track down their biographies, not in Sefaria as normal. The first is Rabbi Moshe Chafetz. He wrote the Melechet Machshevet, and I want to bring us down to his bio for a second. Remembering the goal of learning about these people. He was Italian. This can't possibly be right. He did not live backwards in time. He must have been born in 1511, and I just transcribed it incorrectly. There we go. He wrote poetry. He was a mathematician, a philosopher, a scientist, a member of a very prominent family, the Chafetz family. Sorry, a sloppy cut and paste job. He wrote his commentary on the Torah, which is called Machshevet, Melechet Machshevet, and there's a super commentary by Rabbi Yehuda Leib Yafet. So he is our first new commentary, and he writes about the recognizing, right? That they didn't recognize him because when they bowed down to the ground, it was known that they did not recognize him, right? Almost like as if the opposite of the dream sequence, right? That there's this idea that they wouldn't have bowed to them had they known he was Yosef, which almost goes to show why Yosef goes to these great lengths to get them to bow down to him in the, before he reveals himself, because they wouldn't have bowed down to him then. And here he says something interesting. I'm not sure that I would have phrased it this way. He says, it seems that the scripture, right, near Eshabah HaKatuv, V'hitmar mar al achei Yosef, that the scripture comes to be resentful of Yosef's brothers, right? Sold him like cattle in the wilderness, didn't treat him like brothers, which Yosef did not do because his mercy was aroused in them, and when they were in his hands, he did not do them any harm or scold them except by rebuking a few so that they would repent of their actions. So this is a very different way of categorizing what happens in our pasuk, right? This pasuk is coming to interpret that which came before it. What reason did Yosef alienate himself, right, and speak harshly to them, not act in a way that they did, except in words alone, right? He didn't imprison them all. He didn't tax them. He just was mean to them, right? Which is not good, but it seems like the Melechet Machshevet is saying it's not so bad. Since Yosef recognized his brothers and treated them as brother and a servant, but they never recognized him or treated him as strangers and as enemies. And so it seems like the Melechet Machshevet is taking this moment to actually continue to penalize the brothers, but continue to raise up Yosef, right? In last week's Parsha, that made sense. In this week's Parsha, it's interesting to me that he's doubling down on the brothers being the ones who are in the wrong and Yosef actually behaving nicely. In either way, it's hard to not include Yaakov in this dynamic because the brothers, even if the brothers needed to be strung along, it seems hard to understand why Yaakov does. And they come together. He can't send a note to Yaakov without the brothers knowing too. The last commentary that Nechama Leibovich brings is Rabbi Yehuda Leib Frankfurter Shapira, spelled in many different ways on Google. He is, interestingly, the uncle of Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch. He lived in Germany, a century and a half after the Melech Machshevet. He was a merchant and a Torah scholar, fluent in German, well-versed in Talmud. And he wrote our commentary, Harechashim Levikiah, a pshat commentary on selected Torah passages. This is from Al HaTorah's website. This work initially had little impact. However, its influence spread over the years, starting with references in the Shadal, who we saw last week, Rabbi Luzzatto, and his own nephew, and Rabbi Mecklenburg. So I thought that was interesting that sometimes it takes a while for these things to pick up steam. He's still not, I would say, a terribly well-known scholar, but he wrote the following on Yosef. He wrote on the Dibur HaMatzchel v'Yitnaker, right? That translated here as he was estranged, right? He chose not to make himself recognizable. And again, he doubles down, right? But Tzidkato, Yosef HaTzadik, and in the integrity of his heart for the honor of his father and his household, because he saw that the Lord was with him and that whatever he did, he would succeed. Right. So it seems like, right, and Yosef does often invoke God's name when talking to Paro, that his soul knew very well that the day would come and the words of the dreams that he had dreamed for his father and his brothers would come true. And he was very anxious to see that they would be ashamed and humiliated together with Yaakov, the chosen one of God, right? Bechir Hashem, Lishtachavot Arza Lifnei Beno, that he would have to bow down before Yosef. Now, Yaakov, right, before Yaakov would have to bow down before Yosef. They would have to humble themselves to the dust and kneel down to the ground before him. And it's such an interesting, that this was not that he was anxious, like he was excited, but he was worried about this moment where the grand reveal would happen. Right. So instead of saying, I could never get my brothers to bow down to me if they knew who I was, so I have to hide it. This is a much gentler read, right? That he was anxious about it. He didn't want them to be embarrassed like that. The brothers who were united with him in one womb, which is such a fascinating thing to say about brothers who were born to 4 different mothers from 4 different wombs, right? But that were so close at some point in time. And so therefore he estranged himself from them because he wanted to spare them the embarrassment. Let them bow down, right? Thinking they were bowing to the ruler of a land that was foreign to them. L'moshel eretz nechri be'einehem, right? And he would speak harshly to them so that they would buy into it. And he was not yet allowed to his father's honor and the son of his elders. He turned around in his tricks, right, until they brought him Binyamin, because if he had not restrained himself, he wouldn't have been able to alienate himself any further. And so his heart was set on his father. And so he continued to talk as a foreigner in that way to bring his father to them. And so let's see what the question is that she asks here. In what ways does the author of Rechashim Levikiah agree with the Ramban, and in what way does he add to the Ramban's interpretation? Right, so I would say it seems to me that Rabbi Shapira is agreeing with the Ramban that this is all about achieving the dream, right? It's all about taking the right steps to get the dream to take place, because that's has to be fulfilled. However, it seems to me that what he's saying is it's not as harsh as it sounds. It's in some weird way that I couldn't possibly understand, but maybe made more sense in the 17th century, or to some of you, and you can help me understand it. He felt like it was less embarrassing for them to bow down to him as, vizier of Egypt than as brother Yosef. And so he kept up this ruse to spare them some kind of embarrassment.
Well, he hasn't seen them in years, and they're all there together, badly outnumbered Joseph again. And Joseph remembers telling them about his dream where they had to bow down to him, and they did not like that so bad that they put him in a pit and sold him as a slave. So now in real life, they have to bow down to him, and he may be afraid of their retaliation in some way because he hasn't seen them in years. He doesn't know what they're like now.
Totally. I agree with you. I think, right, that there is a vulnerability there. But what's interesting is that Rabbi Shapira is saying the vulnerability belongs to the brothers, not to Yosef.
Yeah.
Right? I think it's hard. There are so many competing ways to think about what this reunion looked like and why these people were thinking about what they were thinking about. And this is such a fascinating read that without this Gilyon, I never would have come across. Right? As I said, it's not even in Sefaria, even to this day. I think you can get an Al HaTorah. I mean, I know you can get an Al HaTorah. That's where I copied it from. But I think that this idea that the worry was like some kind of formal, sort of formalist worry about like not wanting them to be embarrassed by having to bow down to him. Like, where was that Yosef before? It seems like if only he had had some of that worry about embarrassing them in the past, he could have avoided this whole mess. And so maybe it's meant to show the growth of, of Yosef. I don't know. It's hard for me to understand this take, but I do think it's an interesting one. It's like a a slight spin of the kaleidoscope on the Ramban. Okay, while we think about that, this is an interesting question. I'm not even 100% sure I translated it correctly, so please jump in. This is a 1x, a little harder, not quite as hard as our Ramban's question. She asks, right? The Baal Harechashim Levikia, the Rabbi Shapira, Ish Hame'ah Hayud Zayin Yudchet, a man of the 17th and 18th century, I think is what that means. B'netuato bisganono achar melitzat hamikra. In his style leaning towards biblical metaphors. Lo hirgish b'makom echad. I don't really, he didn't feel in this, maybe in this one place, for this one place, shehevi melitza me'iyov asher einena hulemet klal et inyanenu. He brought a metaphor from Eov, which is not at all appropriate for our matter. So now it does, let's see, there is a hint of it here in the text, but I thank you, Rabbi Bieler, I brought it here. I couldn't put it in the right place. It is this pasuk from Eov, which I actually referenced on Rosh Hashanah. Halo babeten oseni asa uhu v'yechonunu berechem echad. Eov is complaining. He said, did God who made me in my mother's belly make him? Did not one form us both in the womb? So this is the pasuk that I think is being referenced in question 6. I can tell you what Rabbi Bieler wrote. This is just for the sake of the Gilyon to be to help us understand why Rabbi Shapiro would reference this pasuk. This is what Rabbi Bieler said. He said, it would appear that the reference in Eov is establishing that Hashem is the creator of all people. Rabbi Shapiro is trying to stress that Yosef and his brothers all came from the same father, although their birth mothers varied. So given that, right, this is why I especially think it's funny that he mentions this brothers all of one womb. But it seems as though even though that's not accurate, that they're all of one womb, Rabbi Shapiro is trying to stress the unity of them, which again is so interesting to me because it does not seem as though Yosef cares about the unity of all the brothers together, right? He sees himself as a part from the very beginning. But it does seem that there's something more to it. Okay, to bring us home, question 7, an extra surprise source. Rabbi Yitzchak Arama, who's Akedat Yitzchak, who she quotes often. He writes, "V'timahini mimasha katav Ramban," and I love when commentaries speak so strongly about other commentaries. It's like not in vogue anymore to be so forthright, right? But he says, "I am astonished at the Ramban's explanation." The hachalomot, sorry, I don't know why that is spaced out funny. Ha'oseh cholomot yagish pitronan. He says that Yosef did what he did in order to make his dreams come true. What did this benefit him? Even if it profited him, he should not have sinned against his father. As for the dreams, leave it to him who sends them to make them come true, right? That's this pasuk here. It seems infinitely foolish for a man to strive to fulfill his dreams, which are matters beyond his control. This paragraph in this formulation is in Nechama Leibovich's book. It is her translation of this. It is obviously a little bit more than the exact words. But I think that this idea, I so love the Akedat Yitzchak. I've gotten to love him over her essays. This idea that it seems infinitely foolish for a man to strive to fulfill his dreams, which are matters beyond his control. Like, to me, that sums up Yosef in a sentence. Like, I feel like the Akedat Yitzchak has got his number, right? Like, why on earth would Yosef go through this whole traumatic extra year plus of putting his father and his brothers through the ringer for selling him to achieve dreams that really it's only up to God to achieve dreams, right? It feels like I really feel like he is the first commentary who said something that feels very true to me. That Yosef is still chasing something that is not up to him, right? It reminds me of like the prayer from 12 steps, right? To accept the things I cannot change and the power to change the things I can. I horribly mangled it, right? But understanding what things are in my control and what things are not. And Yosef is constantly worried about things that are actually not in his control and trying to make them in his control. And that if anything, these psukim highlight that grave mistake that he has still not learned, right? I think Rabbi Shapiro is trying to say he's learned. He now cares about how his brothers feel. He's trying to spare them the anguish and embarrassment of bowing to him. And the Aramat Yitzchak is, the Akedat Yitzchak is saying, no, Yosef has still learned nothing. Right? He still hasn't learned that the dreams are not in his control. And that it does not benefit him to try to make them come true when God is not ready to make them come true. So, there's no beautiful sum up here. There's not an essay that corresponds directly to this Gilyon. But I think that the fact that she leaves the Akedat Yitzchak as the 7th question, right? She doesn't put him up before the questions or inside of the spectrum, right? Well, I see this Gilyon as a moving spectrum. We start with the Ramban, who says that, okay, it was bad, but it was all about fulfilling the dreams, right? And this whole thing about Binyamin. The Radak, who pushes back against him, but then the Rabbi Chafetz, the Melachat Machshevet, and the Harachashim Levikia, both trying to say it's like the Ramban, but it's not quite as bad as the Ramban, right? Yosef is still trying to make the dreams come true because he thinks it's his goal, but he's trying to do it in the nicest, most gentle, thoughtful way possible. And then at the end, she turns it around and she says, wait a second, let's not believe this, right? Let's remember that Yosef is still being his foolish old self in this moment, and think about how we could have just got into Vayigash, and we could have got into the tearful hugs and the reunion with Yaakov so much sooner if only Yosef had not been this foolish. So although we don't have Nechama's direct voice here because there's no essay, I hear it in the way she composes the Gilyon, which I think is quite beautiful. And I love how she exposed us to 2 new Parshanim as a part of it. So, I think that question of whitewashing is just so so real. It was real in Nechama Leibovich's time. It was real in the Ramban's time and in the Akedah Yitzchak's time. And it's real today, right? Trying to understand that. Oh, yeah, Jerry, please.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Why do you touch it?
Let's see.
There's no need to touch it.
Jerry, did you want to share something? Did I miss something?
We lost the picture. We hear you, but we lost the picture.
Oh, I'm sorry. I turned it off. Do you want it back?
Oh, okay.
I only turned it off because I like to see everyone's face when we discuss, you know. But if you want to reference, I'm happy to pull it back up.
No, that's okay.
So what do you mean by whitewashing?
Meaning, Yosef and his brothers all behaved poorly in the book of Breshit, right? I would say all of the Avot make many strong, courageous choices that are based on a strong connection to God. And the Avot often make mistakes, right? Any number of mistakes. The Parshanim grapple with why Avram sends Hagar and Yishmael out into the Midbar, right? Certainly the question of Yaakov pulling a fast one on Yitzchak, right? And Rivka, being a part of it. The brothers selling Yosef, Yehuda's behavior with Tamar in last week's Parsha, and then this question here, right? Of like, why doesn't Yosef spare them this additional time of uncertainty and sadness and avelut for Yaakov? And I think that the classical commentaries have a tendency to say, oh, it wasn't so bad, right? Or they did it because they had to, or it was one of the tests and we don't understand it. Whereas a sort of more modern take is to say like, no, our avot are flawed just as we are. And it's okay to say that and to learn from that instead of trying to make them be perfect. Right. And I think the Ramban is like a little bit of that example of trying to say, well, of course, chas v'shalom, Yosef would have done such a terrible thing. It must be because of the dreams. And the Akedah Yitzchak is saying, no. Right. This is actually much worse than you thought it was. I can see when he was commenting a second. And so I think that struggle of sort of figuring out where to put Yosef's actions as totally Yosef HaTzadik or as Yosef, someone who made some sort of grave mistakes, is a hard question. That's where the, oh, I can't find it on her sheet. That's where the sort of these decisions come up. The Akedah Yitzchak is quite old, 1400s, but he speaks with a sort of maybe a more modern lens in this way. And so I think the question of how much to whitewash, right? Even this idea that Yosef, right? We left Yosef at last week's Parsha still stuck in jail. And the commentaries are quick to say it's because he doubted God. It's like almost a ridiculous thing to say, right? Yosef, who has lived through so much trauma and then continues to talk about Hashem's role throughout this week's Parsha, is somehow punished for this minor thing, right? That the Avot are on such a grander scale than we are. And I think trying to unwrap this, right, as you said, Sherry, he suffered, or maybe Judith said it, he suffered a grave trauma. Perhaps he's behaving the way he is, not out of spite and not out of some like delusional vision of being able to fulfill his dream, but simply because he's traumatized by his brother's behavior in last week's Parsha.
Yeah.
No, I had an opinion that I formulated listening to this discussion today. I think Joseph is a very complex character. He is everything that we said. He's a tzaddik, he's a good guy, he's a bad guy, all mixed up. And one prevails over the other depending on the circumstances they evolve. He waited 22 years to connect his family, waiting. Well, he was busy in Egypt, but he also was waiting for the right time to have him fulfill his dream. He is the dreamer. He's the one who started the whole thing. He provoked jealousy and envy and his
Yeah.
brother. And his father was kind of oscillating in somewhere. I don't get Jacob yet, but I think that I have to go home and think about the whole thing, start all over again. Maybe next year we'll have a better insight of knowing what we know now about Joseph. But I think I learned that Joseph is not totally bad, not totally good. Is answer is A and B.
Yes. Yes. And I think that she does such a nice job of bringing us both of those perspectives to sort of round it out. I agree. And I think, in terms of him not looking for the brothers, I do think, thinking back to last week's Parsha, there must be a part of Yosef that thought, why haven't they come to look for me yet? Right? Surely my father must have been so upset they would have come and rescued me and bought me back and brought me back home. And so perhaps he's waiting for them to come find him. There's a ridiculous but also beautiful midrash about how Yosef was trying to draw the brothers into his trap, right? He knew there was a famine in Canaan. He knew they would have to come to Egypt, and how he closes off all the gates and he puts their names on a list, and everyone who has to come in has to go through this list. But the brothers, thinking, oh, if we have to go to Egypt, maybe we can find Yosef. They go through the door to the slave market because they assume he's still a slave. And so they're looking for him in the slave market, and he's looking for them at the door. I think I taught a Parsha class on this where I said it was like a missed connection. I don't know if anyone ever reads the missed connections, but there's I think it's in the New York Times. There's a spot where you can say, I saw you across the food court. By the time I got there, you were gone, but I thought we shared a moment, I don't know. That's a really weird one. But, some time where someone's missed. And to me, this feels like the ultimate missed connection, right? I was looking for you at the gate to the food line, and you were looking for me in the slave market. And so we missed each other, right? They still haven't gotten on the same page. But I do think that Yosef is hoping they'll come to him. And that sort of shows that vulnerability that he still carries of do my brothers really care about me? Did my father was he really sad? And that also for sure plays a part here. But yeah, I think he's complicated. And we'll continue to see more about Yosef in next week's Parsha. But for now, this has been a good start.
Can I say just throw out one more possibility, one more explanation?
Yeah.
You could, if you wanted to, say that Yosef didn't want his father ever to know what his brothers had done to him.
Mm-hmm.
How did he end up in Egypt? There would have to be explanations. That's another possibility.
It's such a heartbreaking one, right? It shows the harm that secrets in families cause, right? Because by choosing to keep the brothers' reputations intact with his father, he allows his father to remain thinking that he has died. It's such a heartbreaking choice to have to make, I guess is all I'm saying.
Yes.
But that's a beautiful one. And that sort of follows with Rabbi Shapira, right? That perhaps he's looking to spare everyone's feelings. The mess has been made and he doesn't want to cause further harm. That's certainly possible. But as Nelson said, he started the whole thing, right? It's, you can always sort of turn it back around.
Yes.
Well, I wish that everyone has a less complicated week than we've discovered Yosef to be. Lots of wonderful Hanukkah programming coming up at Shul for people who are able to get there. And
we're coming for the Chinese dinner Friday, Shabbat.
It should be delicious.
Yeah.
And then there is Hanukkah a sing-along on New Year's Eve, or New Year's Eve afternoon at about 3:30 next week. And a Zohart and musical Hallel. I think that's Zohar and art mashed together on Sunday morning. So I hope you'll check some of it out. And if you guys will be here, I'm happy to be here too next Tuesday night. All right, excellent. Well, have a very happy beginning of your Hanukkah and a Shabbat Shalom, and I'll see you then.
Shabbat Shalom, and thank you so much. Thank you.
When are you due back in Skokie?
I will be back not this Shabbat, but next, January 4th.
Okay.
with lots of exciting things that week. Thursday night, there'll be a women's Rosh Chodesh gathering.
Oh,
I'll
yeah.
speak on Shabbat morning, and there'll be a Malava Malka for families and grown-ups. There'll be like a kids program, pizza, and then a grown-up program. So something for everybody. With
What day is that going to be?
January 4th, I believe, is Shabbat.
Good.
Sorry?
No, I'll be in Baltimore with grandchildren next Tuesday night, so I don't promise anything.
That sounds good. Enjoy your grandchildren.
Thank you.
Okay. See you soon. Have a good week.
All right. And Judith, I'm going to see you tomorrow morning. I'm picking Judith up. We're going to be delivering for the first responders at the Skokie Police Department.
Amazing.
Yeah. So Judith, I'll pick you up at 10:15 tomorrow morning, and we'll go to the Skokie Police Department.
10:15.
10:15.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good night.
Thanks.
Good night. Kula mitzvot.